You know, I was a lousy student. I hardly ever ate lunch because I never did my homework, and my teacher in the 3rd standard, Mrs. Nelson, would make me sit outside the tent at Delhi Public School during lunch and do my homework. Because instead of doing my homework, I was playing cricket the previous day. Some months ago, I was in a plane from Dallas to Atlanta, and there was an Indian guy with all of his funny stuff, you know, the high-tech stuff. He's working on 2 or 3 things at the same time. He even had something dangling from the window to give us the flight path. I said, this guy is quite sophisticated. All I can do to press my BlackBerry buttons and my computer to say undo, undo, undo. So finally he looked at me and he said, you're a reader. I said, yeah, how do you guess? He said, you're reading. And he looked at me and he said, Delhi, Hindustan se ho? Are you from India? I said, yes, sir. I said, you too? He said, yes. I said, where are you from? He asked me. I said, I'm from Delhi. I lived in Delhi till I was 20. He said, really? Where? I said, Sundarnagar, Kakanagar area. He said, oh, I used to live in Sundarnagar. I said, wow. He said, did you go to DPS, Delhi Public School? I said, yeah. He said, this is amazing. I said, yeah, I went. He said, you went to DPS? I said, yes. He said, were you ever a student of Mrs. Nelson? 3rd C. They sent the worst students to Mrs. Nelson. And I qualified at the top of that list. Her favorite line was, Thappad khayega muh par. In Hindi, it meant you're going to get a slap on your face. And I did. And it was unfortunate because nobody told me she was a left-hander. So the first time I'm standing in front of her, not having done my homework, I'm watching that right hand. You know, I'm going away and away and away, and wow. So he says, you were in Mrs. Nelson's class? I said, yes. He said, me too. And then he raised his hand and gave me a high five and said, we made it, we made it. When I came back home and told my wife, she burst out laughing because I told her stories about Mrs. Nelson. I said, you never forget what happened in this plane from Dallas to Atlanta. You know, we think we know so much at the moment. We know very little of the Grand Weaver and his plan for the future. The finger of God is in all of history. Secondly, how they harnessed an arena of persecution and transformed it into a platform of opportunity. Just this week, the Archbishop of Canterbury, a very prominent evangelical, has written an article that Christian martyrdom is coming back to front and center all over as Christians are being offered to the lions once again, and it drew attention of the media. The oldest Aramaic-speaking village in Syria is Ma'alula. I've been there. And the thugs went and burned down the churches, burned down their holy places, slaughtered many of them, destroying thousands of years of history. In Kenya, they were asked to identify themselves if they were of the Muslim faith, and they could walk out, and they were given a test question as they were walking out. If you're a Christian out there, you're being slaughtered by these thugs. I know those who are devout in it will disavow it, and thank God they do. But the world is still not saying very much while the follower of Jesus Christ is being tormented and tortured for his or her faith. Iran plays the lead role here. I have seen those tortured for their faith. I've seen those who paid very heavy price. But Oz Guinness has made a profound comment about China. He said, you know, the Chinese church somehow survived the deprivations of communism. The question is, will it survive the abundance of capitalism? Sometimes when we are deprived, we are forced to take our faith more seriously and truly prove what it means in our hearts. Some of you may be personally suffering, physically. Dr. Jowett said, if you speak to a hurting people, you will never lack for an audience. I don't know how many of you have spoken to in Delhi and here who are going through great pain. A young woman who may be here this morning, whom I invited to come, spoke so highly of Brother Reuben and of Shalini. She recognized my name while she was serving, and all of us guys sitting there. She knew we were leaving this afternoon. She asked, could she pack a lunch for all of us? She is a waitress in that dining room. And the first day I was there, she just came over to me and she said, can I talk to you for just a moment? And the tears started running down her face. She said, I'm a very unhappy woman. If I tell you everything that's happening in my home, it breaks my heart. Please pray for me, sir. Total stranger. Total stranger. So it is with some of us, pain, the hurt. I want to read for you a thought by the great Scottish writer James Stewart. Listen to what he says in his book, The Strong Name. It is a glorious phrase that he led captivity captive. The very triumphs of his foes it means he used for their defeat. He compelled their dark achievements to subserve his ends, not theirs. They nailed him to the tree, not knowing by that very act that they were bringing the world to his feet. They gave him a cross, not guessing that he would make it a throne. They flung him outside the gates to die, not knowing that in that very moment they were lifting up all the gates of the universe to let the King of Glory come in. They thought to root out his doctrines, not understanding that they were implanting imperishably in the hearts of men the very name they intended to destroy. They thought they had God with his back to the wall, pinned and helpless and defeated. They did not know it was God himself who had tracked them down to that point. Now here's the clinching line. He did not conquer in spite of the dark mystery of evil. He conquered through it. He did not conquer in spite of the dark mystery of evil. I don't think this is a word game he is playing. God conquers in your life and mine through the dark mystery of evil. You see, we were given only one prohibition: do not eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, because on the day that you do, you'll be as God, knowing good and evil. What it really meant was, don't play God. Don't play God. Because if you play God and define good and evil, everything else becomes up for grabs. They disobeyed that, and ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, quote. Have you looked at our world now? Every tree is protected except for the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. We've redefined everything. And what chaos in this world in which we live. If you're going through suffering and pain, I urge you to seek God each day and ask him what he wants to accomplish through it. What does he want to accomplish through it? I look at my own life many times in all that went wrong and at the moment seemed insurmountable. And today all I can say is I thank God that he brought me through it and taught me what he wanted me to learn. Malcolm Muggeridge says this: contrary to what might be expected, I look back on the experiences that at the time seemed especially desolating and painful with particular satisfaction. Indeed, I can say with complete truthfulness that everything I've learned in my 75 years in this world And everything that has truly enhanced and enlightened my existence has been through affliction and not through happiness, whether pursued or attained. In other words, if it were ever to be possible to eliminate affliction from our earthly existence by means of some drug or other medical mumbo-jumbo, the result would not be to make life delectable, but to make it too banal and trivial to be endurable. This, of course, is what the cross signifies, and it is the cross of Jesus Christ more than anything else that has called me inexorably to Christ. You know, V.S. Naipaul wrote about India, the Trinidadian Indian, wrote the book A Wounded Civilization. Yes, India has lived through a lot of wounds. The whole film Mother India, Nagari Nagari Dware Dware, Dhundure Savariya. You're looking for some respite, some rest from Nagar to Nagar, from riverside, whatever you keep going. So has China, so has Russia. These countries have endured a lot of pain. Maybe out of the civilizations that have experienced much pain, the cross can come through with shining beauty, and the empty tomb can be presented as the greatest hope for humanity. I just want you to know that the mystery of suffering is not as elusive as we may sometimes think it is. The early church conquered, and how they harnessed an arena of persecution and harnessed it to a platform of opportunity. Let me move to my final thought. Number one, as we saw the finger of God in all of history and Christ as its central figure, how they harnessed an arena of persecution, transformed it into a platform of opportunity. And number three, how they saw a priority of an individual over methodology. This is my key point. The priority of an individual over methodology. You know, we can memorize our answers, we can copy our answers, but in the end, God's answer through you is you. It's you. The way He has made you. No, the message is not about you. You are not the centerpiece, but it's the way He has made you individually. I was talking to Brother Anand Mahadevan earlier, and his testimony was first published. I was thousands of miles away, and I immediately copied it, put it on my computer, on my BlackBerry, and I read it to so many people. God used him in the place He placed him. It's the same with you. It's the same with me. He's made you so unique, so unique. You are without replication. It's sui generis, one of a kind. The day you accept that you are the way He hardwired you and softwired you and made you to be who you are, you will take that moment and realize He can use you in a place and setting that He can use nobody else. Billy Graham was asked once by a reporter, "I've heard many preachers better than you. How come He's chosen you to be the evangelist to the world?" Dr. Graham was a very humble man and a very shy man. Looked at him and said, "You know, when I get to heaven, that is going to be my first question. Why me? Why me?" If you will go away with this closing truth today, He has made you unique for His cause and placed you where He wants you to be. He's the grand weaver. He's the great designer. He has His Wesleys and Spurgeons and McShanes and Andrew Murrays and Bonars and all of them. But He has you. He has the Haydens, He has the Sanjas, He has the Lukes. He will call you by name. He has you. I want you to think about this and meditate upon it. Because you know what? When you think about it in these terms, Joseph didn't write a book on 50 different dreams and how to interpret them. If he were living in our time, some publisher would have said, Joseph, write a book on dreams. If Moses were alive in our time, they would have wanted him to open Bush University. Jonah would have been asked to publish exclusive photographs from the inside of a whale and how to use them in evangelistic meetings. Samson would be autographing jawbones. David would be issuing slings to his whole army. No. He has fashioned you the way he has fashioned nobody else. I want to close with one or two illustrations and make a closing application. I was telling the audience in Delhi that when I applied to become a pilot and went to Dehradun for my interview, I was a teenager. The only reason I applied to be a pilot is not passing anything else. So I said, I'll try being a pilot. And I placed in the top 10. There were 300 or so there, and they were going to just select a handful. I said, I'm going to make it. Did everything well, endurance, this, that, theory, all that, okay. So I sat down for my final psychological interview with a rather Churchillian-looking wing commander type guy. In his uniform, he sat across the table, and he looked at me, and he said, Beta, son, you have done very well. And he kept on talking about how well I'd done, and I began to get fearful. I said, something bad is about to come forth. And he looked at me and he said, but Beta, I'm going to reject you. I said, pardon? He said, I'm going to reject you. I said, may I ask you, sir, why? He said, this job is about killing, and psychologically you are not equipped to kill. I said, wow. I walked away from there, came back home, another failure. And a few days later, a Canadian missionary by the name of Russell Self was speaking at the Free Church in Delhi. And after he spoke, I said, Mr. Self, you don't know me. Can I just have half an hour of your time? He said, yes, I'm staying at the Constantia Hall, YW area here. Come and see me tomorrow. I've told this story in Walking from East to West. I went to see him and I told him, I'm not going to make it. I said, everywhere, one way or the other, I hear I'm going to reject you. He turned the Bible very gently, talked to me, and he said, you know, when God takes away from you something you really want, it is to protect you for what He really wants for you. His family traveled for miles in Toronto once to come and meet with me because they'd read this story about their dad, Russell Self. I said, yes, Russell told me these words, and he opened to Psalm 37:5 and gave me that verse. I still sign it many times when I'm signing my book, Walking from East to West, either that or Romans 1:16. If God had not blocked my way all those steps, how could He have ever opened the way to where He wanted me to be? That's it. How could He have ever opened the way to where He wanted me to be if I had not responded to what He's blocked me from? So I want to close with an application for you all. I told Reuben, I said, Reuben, a conference for conference sake will come and go. And we do a lot of conferences around the globe as guest speakers. I said, my prayer for this conference is that God will raise up some young men and women for a change of course in their lives and maybe make them some of the finest apologists the world has ever seen. That's my prayer. I've prayed for you, that out of this, just forget the age right now. Disregard the age. It may be that as a young man or a young woman or a middle-aged, it may be wherever you are, that God has a plan for you to become an articulator and an evangelist, an apologist for God's kingdom. And when you go from here, two things need to happen: the call inside your heart and the gift affirmed by others. So it's not just that I feel impelled, but that others are affirming in me that this ability, this gift, this skill is a gift from God, not for your own doing or your own enjoyment, or you will implode under the weight of egotistical pride. That's not what it's about. If He impels you from within and compels you from without, He will open the opportunities. And my prayer for this conference is that even as the hard work has gone on by others and the investment has been made by so many, and we've merely invested a few hours in coming here and some thoughts in pouring it out, that God will raise up from this conference some men and women who will become evangelists, who are undergirded by apologetics, to become proclaimers of the gospel, giving answers to men and women here and around the world. That's my prayer. And if that's what happens in your life, you have to be seeking it, and others need to be reaffirming it. Maybe He'll call you somewhere else. Maybe He will keep you where you are. In the early church, a story from Fox's Book of Martyrs, a man by the name of Telemachus, living in a little village, old man. And the word of God comes to him to go to Rome and proclaim. He didn't like Rome. He didn't want to go to Rome. But that impelling was there, and he goes. He goes to Rome and walks in through one of these arenas where a gladiatorial fight is going on. He had no idea what this was about. Shocked to watch the bloodletting orgies going on. And he stands up in the middle of that crowd and shouts out, "In the name of Christ, stop this thing. In the name of Christ, forbear." And in that amphitheatrical setting, his voice resonates, and he's running down the steps. "In the name of Christ, stop this thing." Gets into the middle of the arena, and the muscle-bound gladiators watching him coming, voices come from the stands, "Run him through, run him through." And he's heaved down and plunged through, and he's falling on the ground to whisper one more time, "In the name of Christ, stop this thing." The biographer says many other forces came together, but the death of Telemachus sealed the opposition so that there was never more a gladiatorial fight in the Roman arena. You know, secularism has its strengths, as governments cannot enforce belief. Pluralism has its strengths. You must have options given so that the truth has a place to be uttered. Privatization has no place if you're taking your faith and parking it only in your bedroom. Time now to address the secularized world, the pluralized world, the world in search of answers, and take it out into that is going on the outside, that we forget the real heart of the message. Thomas Carlyle said, "The problem is that we spend our time wondering what's going on inside of the whale rather than wondering what's going on inside of Jonah." Jonah was a prejudiced man. He was a racist. He was religiously disposed to only his way of thinking, his people, and he had no tolerance for the violence that was manifested around him, and wished nothing more than a violent revenge from those who had exacted so much from their neighbors. But God speaks to Jonah and asks him to go to Nineveh to speak to the Ninevites. They were the murderers. When Nineveh conquered any nation, the way they would leave their mark upon that nation was to decapitate its intelligentsia, take the heads of these men and women, and build a pyramid in the front of the city gates so that anyone coming in there would know Nineveh's sword had visited there. Now God says to Jonah, I want you to go to Nineveh and preach the gospel. Jonah's immediate reaction was, absolutely not. I'm not going to do it. Nineveh was about 700 miles northeasterly from where he was. Instead, he goes down to Joppa, buys himself a ticket, and goes 2,000 miles in the westerly direction. What is he running from? He's running from the call of God. And I want to tie it in to what even Sanj has said tonight. He's running from the call of God, and God has a way of closing in on him. Remember the famous poem by Francis Thompson? I fled him down the nights and down the days. I fled him down the arches of the years. I fled him down the labyrinthine ways of my mind. And in the mist of tears, I hid from him. And under running laughter, adown titanic glooms of chasmed fears, from those strong feet that followed after. I was sore afraid, lest having him, I have naught beside. So are many men and women, in thinking they will receive the truth of God, that they will have nothing left to enjoy in life. And Jonah was like this, running from God, running from his call, and God corners him and closes in on him. You know the story if you've read it in the pages of Holy Writ. But I like the way God ends this, and of course we are assuming Jonah is the writer of this story, which doesn't make him look very good, but the truth is very powerful. And in the last few verses, he says this, the Lord said, you've been concerned about this vine, though you did not tend it or make it grow. It sprang up overnight and died overnight, but Nineveh has more than 120,000 people who cannot tell their right hand from their left, and many cattle as well. Should I not be concerned about that great city? What God is referring to is that Jonah had sat down under a shaded tree, and he's enjoying the rest for the moment, and all of a sudden he sees that plant begin to shrivel up and die, and he wants to die himself because this tree that provided him shade has gone. And God said to him, are you right to be angry about this? It rose overnight and died overnight. The Hebrew is very strong. The English mitigates the force of what is said. The English says, yes, I have a right to be angry. In the Hebrew, it actually says, it has the force of an expletive, quote, damned angry. I'm damned angry. That's a man talking to God with profanity. I have a right to be upset because I had this shade and now it's gone. And so God ends by saying, you had a right to be angry about a shrub that grew up and then died overnight, and you don't care about that city with all these thousands of people who don't know the difference between their right hand and their left, morally speaking? I want to bring you 3 thoughts from this book. Number 1, Jonah was out of touch with his surroundings. Out of touch with his surroundings. You cannot communicate to people if you're out of touch with them. What kind of a world are we living in today? You know, Sanj toned down his testimony purposely out of respect for the setting and not wanting to sound crass. The first time I met him, he opened up his heart and told me what went on in his life before that. Hayden Coe is here, a famous actor in the Philippines. His picture is on billboards all over. Names of fragrances bear his name, highly successful. It was in June of this year I met Hayden at a gathering. I know I'm not embarrassing him. He's a man who has the courage to face up to what happened. And I was speaking at a businessman's dinner in Manila when he was the first one to walk up to the microphone, and he says, you know, you're talking about meaning and purpose in life. I'm living with shame and guilt and pain. I have no meaning left. And the tears running down his face. And you know, I looked at him, and I knew he was a made-for-the-movies kind of guy. I didn't know he was in the movies. He's actually a medical doctor, a skincare specialist, went into the movie world, made it big, got his life into a shambles in private, on the path to self-destruction. So also Satch. So also many other young men that I meet, and younger ones, that the world of the internet and the world of pornography and the world of sensuality is destroying in our time. My daughter one day said to me, Dad, my daughter Naomi, who works rescuing men and women from the streets of cities and the sex trafficking industry. She lives with a broken heart for what she witnessed and what it did to men and marriages. And she's pleaded with me to co-author a book on pornography with her. I said, honey, I don't want to get into that world. I don't want to touch that stuff. I don't want to research that stuff. She says, Dad, if you only knew how many women's lives are destroyed because of the way men handle this stuff, and marriages that are shattered and marriages that are broken, you would not fight me so much on this. Please write. She said, you write on the sacredness of sexuality. I'll write on what I've seen happen by the desacralization of it. And what's happened in our time, ladies and gentlemen, two things. The entertainment world has forgotten its moral boundaries. They have no boundaries left. The artists want total liberty with no absolutes. And the Lord of the Bible says to us to worship Him in the beauty of holiness. Even beauty must have boundaries. It must be circumscribed by absolutes. Years ago, a famous American journalist by the name of George Will, writing in Newsweek magazine, was commenting on where the entertainment world was going in sensuality and violence. This is dated, but if anything, even worse has happened since then. Here's what he says. Times Square in New York, which is the rotting core of the Big Apple, is home of the city's last growth industry, pornography. This industry has flourished in spite of a naive hope. It represents the failure of a public policy which, like so many liberal policies, was based on nothing more than naive hope. Some aspects of American life have become so vulgar that they can hardly be discussed without contributing to the coarsening of American life. Elbow your way through the dirty men in dirty raincoats and the crowded peep shows, and read for yourself the vivid descriptions of current fare. These are no longer just seedy storefront operations. On 8th Avenue, there's a pornography supermarket, a kind of a supermarket for perverts. It is located in a modern building owned and shared by a major bank. Pornography in this area has achieved new sliminess involving children and animals, and business is booming. And then he goes to the movie world. Until the final minutes, this Latin American film, Snuff, is a mishmash of shootings and knifings and general mayhem. This part is not much worse than what erupts on US television at 9:01 each night after the family hour. But the final minutes of Snuff show a man dismembering and disemboweling a live woman using a knife, wire clippers, and an electric saw. Feminist group have missed with their wondrous knack the larger point and denounced Snuff as an insult to women. The final murder, whether real or fake, is repulsive enough to convince the dismal viewers who want to believe it is real. When I saw the final butchery, left the viewers tittering merrily, asking one another, it was real, wasn't it? The audience would have been surly if the murder had been unconvincing. Remember a decade ago, the Connecticut woman who went to see I Am Curious Yellow. That Swedish film was a great shocker in the 60s, even though it only showed simulated sexual intercourse. That wasn't enough for the Connecticut woman who indignantly walked out and said, I paid for filth and I didn't get filth. You know, that's the world of movies. I'm not saying it's the whole world of movies. What's happened in the cyber world to your children, my children? What are they being exposed to night after night? How can a 12-year-old handle this kind of an assault on the total decimation of the imagination? Could you handle it as an adult? All that is assaulting them, sprawling in a big mass into their imagination, desacralizing sexuality, desensitized to a woman's need for dignity, honor, respect, protection, care. All of this is gone. And our homes are under attack. And if you get out of the homes, you go into ideologies, violence has taken over. These are the two realities of our times: the desacralization of the body and the desacralization of the right of another person to live. I wish I could tell you how many young men I meet in my travels. One of the reasons these guys travel with me is when they come to me and, I'm busy on the road. I mean it. You understand that? From morning till night, your mind is just thinking of what you've got to speak, what you've got to say, what your primary mission there for. But when young guys like this come around and say, I want to travel with you, I want to go with you, I want some time, I heartily say yes, because I know they are the victims of the enemy of our souls. He has time for them to destroy them. And when they are blessed with good looks and good personalities and enough money in the bank, there's someone out there to exploit and plunder them. Our young men, primarily our young men, are living in danger today of the desacralization of the body, and you and I had better understand what is going on in our world right now. When I grew up as a younger man, I hardly heard the word. I don't think I would have known the word pornography when I was a teenager. I don't think I ever saw one, ever held one. And for the life of me, I don't even know what it is that holds a person, except that I do know it changes the way you think and makes you hunger after a feeling, not necessarily after a person who will not be able to hold them for more than a few moments. They're in search of a feeling. And then violence. We talk about these people somehow being programmed or, recalibrated, radicalized. We use new terms as if somehow their will was not engaged in wanting to move in this direction. Those of you in the business world know better than what I'm talking about. You go into a hotel room night after night, this happens. I remember speaking to the Atlanta Braves baseball team once, and I looked at the boys' muscles bulging like watermelons. And I said, it's a terrible feeling to walk into the clubhouse and be the only one who fails the physical. I said, that's who I am. I said, you guys are specimens of athleticism. You guys can hit a ball that I'm not even able to see when it's coming over the plate. I said, so I'm not going to talk to you about how to hit a ball. I said, but I'm going to talk to you about something that I've done probably than most of you, spent my life on the road. And I want to talk to you about how to live your life on the road. I kid you not. The guy's arms dropped, they leaned forward and started to listen. And at the end of it, one of the highest paid players, actually, he was not on the Braves side. This guy was at that time playing for the St. Louis Cardinals. You speak to the two teams. And this guy came over, held my shoulders like this, powerfully built, and he then looked at me, my staff travel assistant standing next to me, and as soon as he heard him talk, out of courtesy, he stepped back. And the tears running down his face, he said, Ravi, I wish I'd heard this message some years ago. He said, I am a multi-million-dollar athlete, but I've lost everything that's of real value in my life. My wife, my children, my family. Why? You sit in a hotel room and that filth comes through. And they sell themselves to these things. They're gone. Now, I don't know what message and ministry God is calling you to, but I just want to say to you this. There's a world of need out there. We all can't meet all of it. But I remember during a huge tragedy in New York City, what happened when a man was, as a city councilman, was asked, how come he didn't know all that was going on in his borough? And he said, I have a hard time sometimes even knowing all that's going on in my home. You're asking me to find out all that's going on in my borough? He said, if you want me to listen to the heart cry of every person in my constituency, and here's what he said, and I quote, you may as well ask me to listen to the sound of every blade of grass growing and the heartbeat of every squirrel. The noise would be deafening on the other side of silence. You may as well ask me to listen to the sound of every blade of grass growing and the heartbeat of every squirrel. The noise would be deafening on the other side of silence. There's a vast scream out there. I'm going to ask you this. What portion of that gigantic scream, all of which can only be heard in one heart, and that is the heart of God, where there's an aggregate of human suffering, what portion of that is He assigning to you? Are you willing to take it? What portion of the world's pain is He going to ask you to carry? Are you willing to carry it? God has called us to Christian Apologetics. He's going to call everybody to it. He's called some of you to walk into the streets of Mumbai or Hyderabad or whatever, rescue them. God be with you. Every calling is a noble calling. I'm just asking you this. Are you bearing your burden for what God has called you? Get in touch with your surroundings. Secondly, I want to ask you, have you got in touch with your message? Jonah lost sight of his message. You know what the message of God is? That in His love and in His grace and in His mercy, He reaches out to us in our depths and transforms, forgives, and redeems by sending His Son to the cross. Are you in touch with your message? One of the things I've learned, which is really quite amazing, is this. God has a time, and God has a timetable. I believe that very much. I struggled and suffered with my back for 27 years of agony and pain. Those of you know my story, and so many of you, actually one young man as he walked in tonight, put his hand on my back and said, "How's your back doing?" I had a triple herniation, 2 metal rods from my middle of my back all the way into my tailbone, 8 screws bolting me in, with 2 major surgeries that have transpired. Last year, through an incredible experience, a man from Singapore, godly man, came and said God had spoken to him. I don't have the time to go into the story to tell you. But as he laid his hand on my back and prayed, and I'd been prayed for years and years and years, it was an incredible thing. Maybe I'll just give you a snippet of it. He said, God told me 2 things about you yesterday. Number one, that is anointing in your life in the years that is going to be greater than the years to come. I said, Dew, are you really speaking from your heart that God said this to you? He said, yes. I said, I would welcome it. He said, but then Ravi, he told me something I have no clue about. He said, tell Ravi, like the Apostle Paul, he'll have a thorn in the flesh, but I'll take care of him. 3, 4, 5. He said, lying in bed there, I said, Lord, I don't know what 3, 4, 5 means. He said, you tell Ravi, he'll know. He said, I'm here to tell you here in Atlanta as I'm visiting from Singapore, God wants me to tell you He's going to take care of you 3, 4, 5, and I haven't a clue what that means. I got the tears in my eyes. I said, Dew, from 1985, the pain in my back has been L34 and L45. I'd get up in the morning and didn't know if I could walk straight. The shooting pain in my back, sometimes I'd sit in my car and just cry. The agony. I don't want to get into medicines because I don't want to foul with my brain, and so I just live in the pain. A few days later, after Dew prayed for me, my travel associate and I were in another city. I got off security, and I sat down on a chair and bent my knee and bent down like this to tie my shoelace. He looked at me and said, what are you doing? I said, Corinne, I wasn't aware of what I'm doing. Because I'll tell you what, prior to that prayer, 29th May last year, if I'd done this and tied my shoelace, I'd be walking in pain for 6 to 7 weeks with anti-inflammatories because it would yank something in my back and I would just be hobbling over just to do this. I couldn't tie my shoelace without kneeling on the floor. I just looked at him and said, this is amazing, absolutely amazing. I'd already told my wife what had happened on the prayer. Since